A malnourished pit bull, her ribs starkly visible, appeared in a stranger's yard. Two tiny pups trailed behind her, their frail bodies trembling with exhaustion. Their desperate eyes told a story of survival and resilience. What unfolded next is a powerful tale of courage and kindness, one that will touch your heart and stay with you forever. Before we begin, don't forget to follow our page, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and leave a comment below. Your engagement helps us share more inspiring stories and spread awareness about animals in need. The morning sun was just beginning to peek through the dense clouds when Grace Parker, a retired nurse in her late 50s, heard an unusual sound outside her home. Living in a quiet suburb, Grace had grown accustomed to peaceful mornings filled with bird song and the distant hum of passing cars. But this sound was different, a soft, high-pitched whimper that tugged at her heartstrings. Curious and slightly concerned, she pulled on her cardigan and stepped out onto the back porch. As her eyes scanned the yard, they fell on a sight that made her heart ache. Near the edge of her fence, a malnourished pit bull stood, her thin body trembling as she nudged two tiny pups forward with her nose. The mother's ribs were visible beneath her dull, patchy coat, and the pups looked even worse, frail, shivering, and struggling to keep their footing on the damp grass. Grace froze for a moment, her mind racing. She had seen stray dogs before, but nothing like this. These animals weren't just lost. They were fighting to survive. The mother dog met Grace's gaze with wary yet pleading eyes. It was as if she was asking for help, but too afraid to trust. Grace crouched down slowly, trying to appear as non-threatening as possible. "Hey there, sweetheart," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "It's okay. You're safe here." The pit bull didn't move, her body tense and ready to bolt. Grace noticed a deep scar running along the dog's hind leg, a grim reminder of whatever hardship she had endured. The pups whimpered weakly, their tiny bodies huddled together for warmth. Grace's nursing instincts kicked in, and she knew she couldn't just stand there and watch them suffer. Moving cautiously, she retreated into the house to grab some food and water. From her pantry, she pulled out leftover chicken and filled a bowl with warm water. Returning to the yard, she set the bowls down a few feet away from the fence and backed off, giving the mother dog space to decide if she felt safe enough to approach. The pit bull hesitated, her eyes darting between Grace and the food. Her protective instincts were evident as she stood guard over her pups, ensuring they were shielded from any potential threat. Finally, hunger overcame her fear, and she cautiously stepped forward, sniffing the air before lowering her head to eat. The pups tried to follow, but were too weak to stand. Their tiny whimpers tugged at Grace's heart even more. Grace watched with a mix of relief and sadness. She couldn't imagine the journey this small family had endured to end up in her yard. Where had they come from? How long had they been wandering? These questions swirled in her mind, but one thing was clear. This dog had chosen her yard for a reason. She felt an unshakable responsibility to help them. The mother finished eating quickly, licking the bowl clean before nudging her pups closer to the water. Grace noticed how gently she cared for them, her nose nudging their tiny heads as if to encourage them to drink. It was a tender moment that made Grace realize just how strong the bond between them was, despite their dire circumstances. Grace took a deep breath, her mind already forming a plan. She couldn't leave them outside, not with the weather turning colder by the hour. The pups wouldn't survive another night in the open, and the mother needed medical attention. But how could she gain their trust enough to bring them inside? She decided to try again. Slowly, she inched closer to the fence, keeping her movements calm and deliberate. "You're a good mama, aren't you?" she murmured, her voice soft and soothing. "Let me help you. I promise I won't hurt you." The mother dog looked up, her amber eyes locking onto Grace's. For a moment, it felt as if they were communicating without words, a silent plea for help met with a promise of compassion. Grace extended her hand, palm up, holding a small piece of chicken as an offering. The dog hesitated, her nose twitching as she sniffed the air. Then, with a cautious step, she moved closer, her pups remaining huddled where she had left them. When the mother finally took the piece of chicken from Grace's hand, the older woman felt a surge of hope. It was a small victory, but it was a start. Over the next hour, Grace worked patiently, inching closer and speaking gently, until the mother dog allowed her to stroke her head. The fur was rough and thin beneath her fingers, but Grace didn't mind. She had gained the dog's trust, and that was all that mattered. By the time the sun was high in the sky, Grace had managed to coax the little family onto her porch. Wrapping the pups in an old blanket, she carried them inside, their tiny bodies warm against her chest. The mother followed closely, her eyes never leaving her babies. Grace set them down in a corner of the living room she had prepared with towels and a space heater, creating a makeshift sanctuary for them. As she watched the mother curl around her pups, Grace felt a deep sense of purpose. She didn't know what challenges lay ahead, but one thing was certain: she wouldn't let this family down. The next morning, Grace woke up earlier than usual. Her first thought was the small family of 3 she had taken in the night before. She made her way to the living room, her footsteps light as she peeked into the corner where the mother pit bull and her pups rested. The scene warmed her heart. The mother was curled protectively around her pups, her amber eyes alert as Grace approached. The little ones seemed more at ease now, their tiny bodies snuggled into the warmth of their mother's fur. Grace knelt down a few feet away, careful not to intrude on their space too quickly. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said softly. The mother pit bull's ears twitched at her voice, but she didn't growl or retreat. It was a small sign of progress, one that filled Grace with hope. Grace had spent the previous evening researching how to care for malnourished dogs, especially those with young pups. She had learned that patience would be key, as the mother's trust was still fragile. Carrying a small tray, she placed a bowl of warm oatmeal, mixed with chicken, and a fresh dish of water nearby, careful to keep her movements slow and steady. The mother sniffed the air, her nose twitching as she caught the scent of food. Grace took a step back, sitting on the floor to observe. The pit bull cautiously stood, her ribs still painfully visible beneath her coat, and approached the bowls. As she ate, her pups whimpered softly, their tiny noses pressing against her side. Grace smiled as the mother paused to nudge one pup closer to her belly, ensuring it could nurse while she ate. "You're such a good mama," Grace murmured. "They're lucky to have you." Over the next few days, Grace established a routine. She spent hours sitting on the floor, speaking gently to the mother pit bull while tending to her basic needs. She named her Bella, inspired by the quiet strength she radiated despite her frail state. The pups, she decided, would be called Max and Daisy. Max was the slightly larger one, always the first to wiggle toward Bella for milk, while Daisy was smaller and more timid, often leaning into her brother for support. Though Bella was wary, her trust in Grace grew with each passing day. She no longer flinched when Grace entered the room and even allowed her to gently pet her head during meal times. The pups, now stronger and more curious, began to toddle around the living room, their tiny tails wagging as they explored their surroundings. Despite the progress, Grace knew Bella and her pups needed more than she could provide alone. Bella's scarred leg worried her, and the pups required vaccinations to protect them from illness. Grace made an appointment with Dr. Martinez, a veterinarian she had known for years. The thought of transporting Bella made her nervous, but she was determined to do what was best for the little family. The morning of the vet visit arrived, and Grace prepared the car with blankets to make it as comfortable as possible. Bella, sensing something was different, became anxious. She paced the room, her eyes darting between her pups and Grace. "It's okay, Bella," Grace reassured her. "We're just going to see a nice doctor. He'll help you feel better." Grace knelt beside Bella, holding out a piece of chicken as a peace offering. Bella hesitated, but eventually accepted it, allowing Grace to gently guide her into a crate she had borrowed. The pups were placed in a smaller carrier, their soft whimpers breaking Grace's heart. Bella barked anxiously, her nose pressed against the crate door as she tried to reach them. The drive to the clinic was tense. Grace spoke to Bella the entire way, her voice calm and soothing. "You're so brave, Bella. We'll be back home soon, I promise." At the clinic, Dr. Martinez greeted them warmly. He examined Bella's leg, confirming that the scar was an old wound that had healed poorly but wasn't infected. However, her malnourished state required immediate attention, so he prescribed a special diet to help her regain strength. The pups, though tiny, were declared healthy, much to Grace's relief. As they left the clinic, Grace felt a renewed sense of determination. Bella and her pups had a long road ahead, but she was committed to seeing them through it. She glanced in the rearview mirror at Bella, who was now lying calmly in the crate, her eyes watching Grace with something that felt like gratitude. When they arrived home, Bella immediately rushed to her pups, licking them and nudging them close. Grace sat nearby, watching the reunion with tears in her eyes. It was in that moment she realized how deeply she had come to care for them. Bella wasn't just a stray dog anymore. She was family. The days following the vet visit brought a new sense of hope to Grace's household. Bella was responding well to her new diet, and her coat was beginning to show signs of improvement. The pups, Max and Daisy, grew more playful with each passing day, their tiny tails wagging as they explored the living room. Grace felt a sense of pride watching them thrive, but she also knew the journey wasn't without its challenges. It was a crisp evening when the first major setback occurred. Grace had just finished cleaning up after dinner when a sharp bark from Bella startled her. Rushing to the living room, she found Bella pacing frantically near the front door, her ears pinned back and her body tense. Max and Daisy, sensing their mother's distress, huddled together in the corner of their play area. "What's wrong, Bella?" Grace asked, her voice laced with concern. Before she could investigate further, a loud knock echoed through the house. Grace's heart sank. She wasn't expecting visitors, and the timing couldn't have been worse. Bella barked again, her protective instincts kicking in as she positioned herself between the door and her pups. Grace hesitated before opening the door, where she was met by her neighbor, Mrs. Davenport. The elderly woman's expression was stern, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Grace," Mrs. Davenport began, her tone sharp, "I've heard barking coming from your house all week. Are you keeping a dog in there? You know this neighborhood has rules about pets, especially dangerous breeds like pit bulls." Grace felt a pang of frustration but forced herself to remain calm. "Bella isn't dangerous, Mrs. Davenport. She's just a stray I'm fostering. She and her pups needed help." Mrs. Davenport frowned, clearly unimpressed. "I understand you have a kind heart, but pit bulls have a reputation. They're unpredictable, and I don't think it's safe for the neighborhood. You should call animal control before someone gets hurt." The words stung, but Grace refused to back down. "Bella is no threat to anyone. She's been nothing but gentle. Please, give me some time to find her a permanent home." Mrs. Davenport muttered something under her breath before walking away, leaving Grace standing in the doorway with her emotions in turmoil. Closing the door, she turned to see Bella watching her, as if sensing her distress. "It's okay, Bella," Grace said, kneeling beside her. "We're not going anywhere. I won't let anyone take you away." The encounter, however, left Grace feeling uneasy. She knew some people harbored prejudice against pit bulls, but hearing it so directly from her neighbor made the reality of their situation hit harder. She couldn't shake the fear that Mrs. Davenport might report them to the authorities, forcing her to make a decision she wasn't ready to face. Determined to protect Bella and her pups, Grace decided to reach out to a local rescue organization. That night, after the dogs were settled, she researched groups that specialized in pit bull rehabilitation and rehoming. She found a nonprofit called Second Chances Rescue, known for advocating against breed discrimination and helping misunderstood dogs find loving homes. The next day, Grace contacted the organization and spoke to a volunteer named Emily. "Your story is incredible," Emily said, after listening to Grace's account. "We'd love to help. If you're open to it, We can arrange a home visit to assess Bella and her pups. It's important to ensure they're safe and healthy before we begin the adoption process." Grace agreed, feeling a glimmer of hope. The thought of Bella and her pups finding a forever home was bittersweet. She had grown so attached to them, but she knew that giving them a chance at a stable, loving future was the right thing to do. As the days passed, Grace prepared for the rescue's visit. She worked tirelessly to ensure Bella and her pups were comfortable and well-adjusted. The bond between them only deepened, and Grace couldn't help but wonder if letting them go would be harder than she anticipated. Finally, the day of the home visit arrived. Emily and another volunteer, Mark, stepped into Grace's home with warm smiles. Bella was initially cautious, but eventually relaxed as Grace introduced her to the visitors. Max and Daisy, curious and playful, earned laughter and praise from the rescue team. "They're in great hands," Emily said, turning to Grace. "You've done an amazing job with them. Bella's trust in you is remarkable, considering everything she's been through." Grace smiled, but her heart felt heavy. The idea of saying goodbye to Bella and her pups weighed on her, even as she knew it was the best choice for their future. As the visit concluded, Emily assured Grace they would begin searching for the perfect home for Bella and her pups. Grace nodded, but as she watched Bella curl up with Max and Daisy later that night, she couldn't shake the thought. Could she truly let them go? The days following the home visit from Second Chance's rescue brought a mix of emotions for Grace. On one hand, she felt relieved that Bella and her pups were now on the path to finding a permanent, loving home. On the other, the thought of letting them go gnawed at her heart. Every glance at Bella, every wag of Max and Daisy's tiny tails, reminded her how deeply they had become part of her life. Grace's apprehension wasn't the only challenge she faced. Mrs. Davenport's disapproving gaze seemed to linger every time Grace stepped outside. The tension escalated one morning when Grace found an official-looking letter in her mailbox. She opened it with trembling hands and read the notice from the Neighborhood Association. "Dear Ms. Parker, it has come to our attention that you are housing a breed of dog that may violate our community's pet regulations. We kindly request that you remove the animals from your property within 14 days to avoid further action." Grace's chest tightened. It wasn't just a request, it was an ultimatum. She felt a mix of anger and despair rise within her. How could anyone look at Bella and her pups and see a threat instead of the sweet, loving family they were? She spent the day trying to keep herself busy, but the weight of the letter stayed with her. That evening, as she sat in the living room, Bella patted over and rested her head on Grace's lap. The gesture was so tender, so trusting, that tears welled up in Grace's eyes. "You don't deserve this, Bella," she whispered, running her fingers through the dog's coat. "You and your babies deserve a chance, and I won't let anyone take that away from you." Determined not to give in, Grace reached out to Emily at Second Chance's rescue and explained the situation. Emily's response was swift and supportive. "I'm so sorry you're dealing with this, Grace," Emily said. "Unfortunately, breed discrimination is a reality we face all the time. But we're here to help. Let's work on finding Bella and the pups a placement as soon as possible." Despite Emily's reassurance, Grace felt the weight of the clock ticking down. The Neighborhood Association's deadline loomed, and she knew Mrs. Davenport wouldn't hesitate to escalate the situation. That night, she barely slept, her mind racing with worry. The next morning, as Grace fed Bella and the pups, she noticed something was off. Daisy, the smaller and more timid of the pups, wasn't her usual playful self. Instead of eagerly wagging her tail and following Max around, she lay curled up in the corner, letting out a soft whimper when Grace approached. "Daisy?" Grace crouched down, gently lifting the tiny pup into her hands. Her body felt warm, too warm. Panic surged through Grace as she realized Daisy had a fever. Without wasting a moment, Grace wrapped Daisy in a blanket and called Dr. Martinez. "It's Daisy," she explained, her voice trembling. "She's not herself. She's running a fever and she's so lethargic." "Bring her in right away," Dr. Martinez replied. "I'll be ready for you." The drive to the clinic felt like an eternity. Bella seemed to sense something was wrong, pacing back and forth near the door as Grace left with Daisy. When they arrived, Dr. Martinez wasted no time examining the pup. "It looks like an infection," he said after a few tests. "It's not uncommon for pups this young, but it's good you caught it early. I'll start her on antibiotics, and she should recover in a few days." Relief washed over Grace, but it was tempered by the realization of how fragile the pups were. Back at home, Bella greeted Daisy with frantic licks and soft whimpers, her motherly instincts kicking in. Grace sat beside them, stroking Bella's head. "You're such a good mom," she murmured. "We'll get through this, all of us." That night, Grace stayed up with Daisy, ensuring she was warm and hydrated. Bella refused to leave her side, curling protectively around her sick pup. The sight was both heartbreaking and heartwarming, a testament to the unbreakable bond between them. As the days passed, Daisy's condition improved and her playful energy returned. The ordeal had brought Grace and Bella even closer, solidifying their trust in one another. But with the neighborhood's deadline approaching, Grace knew their time together might be running out. Despite the challenges, Grace refused to give up. She had faced obstacles before, and she wasn't about to let prejudice dictate Bella and her pup's fate. With renewed determination, she reached out to Emily again, asking if they could accelerate the adoption process. "I'll do whatever it takes," Grace said firmly. "I just want them to be safe and loved." As Grace hung up the phone, she looked at Bella, who was now resting peacefully with Max and Daisy by her side. "We're going to figure this out," she promised. "No matter what, I won't let you down." The deadline from the neighborhood association loomed closer, and Grace felt the pressure mounting. Each day, she woke up with a knot in her stomach, unsure of what challenges might arise. Bella and her pups, unaware of the brewing storm, continued to fill the house with their warmth and energy. Max and Daisy were thriving, their tiny tails wagging as they played, and Bella seemed more at ease, her trust in Grace growing deeper with every interaction. But Grace knew she was running out of time. Despite Emily's assurances, finding a home for Bella and her pups wasn't happening as quickly as Grace had hoped. Breed restrictions, common misconceptions about pit bulls, and the logistics of rehoming an entire family made the process more complicated than expected. One afternoon, while Grace was folding laundry in the living room, another sharp knock echoed through the house. Bella's protective instincts kicked in, and she let out a low growl, positioning herself between the door and her pups. Grace rushed to calm her, gently stroking her head. "It's okay, Bella," she whispered. "Stay here with the babies." Grace opened the door to find Mrs. Davenport standing there again, this time with another neighbor in tow. The man was younger, probably in his 30s, with an equally stern expression. "Grace," Mrs. Davenport began, her voice clipped, "we've given you ample time to address this situation. The barking is disruptive, and we can't ignore the potential danger these dogs pose." Grace felt her temper flare, but kept her tone measured. Bella is not dangerous. She's a loving, gentle dog, and her pups are no trouble at all. They're just trying to recover from a rough start in life. The younger man stepped forward. "Rules are rules, ma'am. If you don't comply, we'll have no choice but to involve animal control." The words hit Grace like a punch to the gut. She clenched her fists, her mind racing for a solution. But before she could respond, a voice called out from the sidewalk. "Is there a problem here?" Emily, the volunteer from Second Chance's rescue, stepped onto Grace's porch, her presence radiating calm authority. She had arrived early for a follow-up visit, and her timing couldn't have been better. Mrs. Davenport frowned. "And you are?" "I'm Emily, from a licensed animal rescue organization," she replied, her tone firm. "We're working with Grace to ensure these dogs are placed in safe, permanent homes. Everything is being handled responsibly." The younger neighbor opened his mouth to argue, but Emily cut him off. "I understand your concerns, but Bella and her pups are not a danger to anyone. They're victims of unfortunate circumstances, and they deserve compassion, not judgment." Mrs. Davenport bristled, but said nothing. eventually turning on her heel and walking away. The younger man followed, grumbling under his breath. Grace let out a shaky breath of relief, tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you, Emily," she said. "I didn't know what I was going to do." Emily placed a reassuring hand on Grace's shoulder. "You're not alone in this. We'll make sure Bella and her pups are safe, no matter what." Inside the house, Bella greeted Emily with a wag of her tail, sensing the visitor was a friend. Emily crouched down, scratching Bella behind the ears before turning to Grace. "I have good news," Emily said with a smile. "We found a potential foster family for Bella and the pups. They live on a farm about an hour from here. It's the perfect environment for them, plenty of space to run, and the family has experience with pit bulls." Grace's heart ached at the thought of saying goodbye, but she knew it was the right decision. "When can they meet them?" "They're available this weekend," Emily replied. "We can arrange the transportation and accompany you to the meeting." Grace nodded, her emotions swirling. The idea of Bella and the pups leaving her home was bittersweet. They had become such a big part of her life, and the thought of letting them go was painful. But she also knew they deserved a place where they could truly thrive. As the evening settled in, Grace sat on the floor with Bella and the pups, stroking their soft fur and whispering words of love and reassurance. Bella nuzzled her hand, her amber eyes filled with trust. "This isn't goodbye," Grace murmured, tears slipping down her cheeks. "It's just the next chapter in your story. You'll be safe and you'll be loved. That's all I've ever wanted for you." The weekend was fast approaching, and Grace knew the hardest part of this journey was yet to come. The weekend arrived quicker than Grace expected. She spent the days leading up to it preparing Bella and the pups for their big move. She carefully packed a bag with toys, blankets, and the special food Dr. Martinez had prescribed. Every item was chosen with love, a small piece of the life they had built together over the past few weeks. On the morning of the meeting, Emily arrived with a van from the rescue organization. Bella, sensing the shift in routine, stayed close to Grace's side. Her pups, oblivious to the significance of the day, tumbled around the living room, playfully nipping at each other's ears. Grace knelt beside Bella, gently stroking her head. "You're going to love your new home," she whispered. "There's so much space for you and the babies to run and play, and they're going to take such good care of you." Bella leaned into Grace's hand, her amber eyes locking onto hers, as if she understood every word. Emily loaded the pups into a soft carrier, while Grace guided Bella into a crate lined with one of her favorite blankets. Bella's nose twitched as she sniffed the familiar fabric, a small comfort in the midst of so much change. Grace felt her chest tighten, but she forced herself to stay strong. The drive to the farm was quiet. Grace sat in the back with Bella's crate, keeping a hand on its door to reassure her. The pups, nestled in their carrier, let out soft whimpers, but Grace's voice calmed them. "It's okay, sweethearts. We're almost there," she murmured. When they arrived, the farm was everything Emily had described. Rolling fields stretched as far as the eye could see, and a sturdy wooden fence surrounded a spacious yard. Linda knelt beside Bella's crate, speaking softly to her. Bella, ever protective, watched her cautiously but didn't growl. When the crate was opened, Bella stepped out slowly, her eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings. Sarah held out her hand, offering Bella a treat, and after a moment of hesitation, Bella took it gently. The pups were next, bounding out of the carrier with tiny yips. They explored the grass under Linda's watchful eye while Bella stayed close, her protective instincts still strong. Grace watched the scene unfold, her heart a mix of pride and sadness. Seeing Bella and the pups in this open, welcoming environment was everything she had hoped for, but it didn't make saying goodbye any easier. "You've done something incredible," Emily said, placing a comforting hand on Grace's shoulder. "Because of you, they have a second chance at life." Grace nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She crouched beside Bella one last time, wrapping her arms around her and pressing her cheek against Bella's head. "You're going to be so happy here," she whispered. "Be brave, Bella. You're stronger than you know." As Grace stood, Bella nuzzled her hand, a gesture of trust and gratitude. Grace wiped away a tear, watching as Bella followed Linda and Sarah toward the house, her pups trotting close behind. The drive home felt emptier than Grace anticipated. The house, once filled with the sounds of Bella and her pups, now seemed eerily quiet. But as she sat on the couch, she found comfort in knowing she had done the right thing. That evening, Grace received a message from Linda. It was a photo of Bella lying on the porch, her pups curled up beside her, with the caption, "They've already made themselves at home. Thank you, Grace." Grace smiled through her tears. Bella and her pups were safe, loved, and happy. And that was all that mattered. The days following Bella and her pups' departure were quiet, but Grace found herself reflecting on the incredible journey they had shared. Her once ordinary days had been filled with purpose, and now her home felt both empty and full at the same time. It wasn't the absence of Bella and the pups that lingered most. It was the lessons they had left behind. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Grace sat on her porch with a cup of tea. She scrolled through her phone, rereading Linda's updates about Bella, Max, and Daisy. Each message brought a smile to her face. Photos of Bella exploring the farm, the pups playing in the yard, and even a short video of Sarah teaching Max to sit. "They're thriving," Grace thought with a bittersweet smile. "Just like I knew they would." As Grace put her phone down, a soft knock startled her. Opening the door, she found Emily standing there, holding a bouquet of sunflowers and a small envelope. "Emily, what brings you here?" Grace asked, stepping aside to let her in. Emily handed her the flowers with a warm smile. "I just wanted to stop by and thank you again. You went above and beyond for Bella and her pups, and it's because of you that they have the life they deserve." Grace blushed, setting the flowers on the table. "I couldn't have done it without your support. They were such a blessing to me." Emily nodded, then held out the envelope. "There's one more thing. The family wanted to share something with you." Grace opened the envelope, revealing a handwritten note. The words, written in neat, looping handwriting, brought tears to her eyes. "Dear Grace, we can't thank you enough for everything you've done for Bella, Max, and Daisy. They've brought so much joy into our lives, and it's all because of your love and dedication. Please know that you'll always be a part of their story. We'd love for you to visit any time. You'll always be welcome here. With love, Linda, Mike, and Sarah." Inside the envelope was also a photo of Bella lying in the grass, her head resting on Sarah's lap, while Max and Daisy played in the background. Grace held the picture close, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I don't know what to say," Grace murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "They're so happy, and that's all I ever wanted for them." Emily smiled, her eyes soft. "It's all anyone could ask for. You gave them a second chance, Grace. That's something not everyone would do." The two women sat together for a while, sharing stories of the animals they'd helped and the challenges they'd faced. As the evening wore on, Grace realized that while her chapter with Bella and the pups had ended, her story wasn't over. The next morning, Grace found herself scrolling through the Second Chances rescue website. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw a photo of another pit bull, this one an older male named Rocky. His bio described him as loyal and gentle, but often overlooked because of his age and breed. Grace stared at the screen for a moment, then picked up her phone and dialed Emily's number. "Hi, Emily. I was looking at the website, and I think I'd like to meet Rocky." The following week, Grace stood in her living room once again, this time welcoming a new soul into her home. Rocky, with his soft eyes and graying muzzle, trotted inside cautiously, his tail wagging as Grace knelt to greet him. "Welcome home, Rocky," she said, smiling as she gently stroked his head. "We're going to make some new memories together." And just like that, Grace's journey continued. Bella and her pups had taught her the power of second chances, and now she was ready to offer the same love and compassion to another soul in need. As Rocky settled onto a blanket in the corner of the living room, Grace glanced at the photo of Bella and her pups on the mantel. She knew they would always hold a special place in her heart, but she also knew her capacity for love was limitless. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of another story. If this story touched your heart, let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts about Bella, Max, and Daisy's journey. Don't forget to follow our page, subscribe to the channel, and hit the like button. Share this video with someone who loves heartwarming stories about animals. It helps us continue spreading messages of hope, courage, and second chances. Thank you for being part of this journey.